Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Gui. China will cancel the COVID-19 test and quarantine for international arrivals as it is to downgrade the Class A management of COVID-19 to Class B from January the 8th next year. That is according to the National Health Commission of this country. Those with normal health declarations could get in without a hitch. Many countries welcomed China's decision to reboot tourism. Well, a few countries are also considering right now imposing mandatory COVID tests or quarantine measures for travelers from China. What does China's COVID policy shift mean for the Chinese economy and the world's economic growth momentum? Let's loop in our panelists. I'm glad to be joined by Wang Dan, Chief Economist of Hang Seng Bank China, Rick Dunham, Director of Global Business Journalism Program with Tsinghua University, and also Lim Tian-Wai, Adjunct Senior Research Fellow from East Asian Institute at National University of Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. The optimized switch of COVID policies in China, many believe it's going to have an important impact on China's economic recovery for the coming year. Your thoughts, Dan?
This is a necessary step, although the opening up is a lot faster than many people had hoped. So we have seen this rapid spread of COVID in many cities in China, which has disrupted the production process. But as far as I can see, the services consumptions in major cities have already started a recovery. So there is hope that it will pick up pace in the beginning of next year.
How much do you see really is there for the momentum of China's economic growth, Dan?
Well, when it comes to economic growth, it's always tricky to predict when the COVID has been lasting for so long. Now, the only thing that we can see is that the policies are on the right track. We have been noticing that there were more long-term investment in the corporate sector, especially in manufacturing. Although the export has been slowing down, the domestic demand has been recovering. So the economic growth prospect in 2023 is a lot higher than this year, but we don't think we can go back to the potential rate of growth yet, which is close to 6%. We give the economic forecast next year to be 5.5% to be our upper bound. But that's under the assumption that there will be major economic support in terms of macro policies and subsidies.
We see the market certainly has been reacting to the latest policy shift in China, but how sustainable will that be, particularly in the short term? It's a very interesting question, isn't it, Dan?
It is very interesting because so far the market has been very optimistic, especially when it comes to stock investment. People have been waiting for so long for the recovery. Any good news could stir up this positive sentiment, which I think is justified but not sustainable, because there for sure will be more volatility in the coming month. There can be back and forth in the COVID spread as well. So I think before the two sessions happen in March, no one should be overly optimistic or aggressive in their investment position. And that's out of a cautionary stance. And I think it's very important to be patient.
Rick, you just came back to China from the United States after quite an interval of almost 2 years, probably even more. You experienced firsthand what happened at the border, the quarantine process, and now the switch of the policy. Tell me more about your thoughts, personal feelings.
Well, my head's still spinning from quarantine and no quarantine and testing, and then sort of the freedom once you leave quarantine. I mean, the thing that struck me the most is I've come from the United States where almost nobody is wearing masks. And now in Beijing, it seems like half the population has been struck down in the past 10 days. I mean, I agree with what Dan said about the economy. I think the most important thing is consumer confidence right now for the Chinese economy, the demand side within China. If people are feeling better about the future and buying things and maybe eventually traveling again, I think that'll have a big impact on the economy. I think it'll be demand-driven growth. I think internationally, the exports are going to be slow to recover, both because of a worldwide recession outside of countries like the United States and changes in supply chains until we know that they're safe.
Go to you, Tianwai, about what's going on right now in the world and what does that mean for China. We see this optimized policy about COVID in China. This is providing both the market and it seems that international investors a lot of more space to look forward to when working on China-related projects. But of course, this is more complicated than just the policy itself. There's geopolitics, there's the general shifting situation of the world, including how people look at China. So at this moment, how do you see these factors also melt in as we speak?
Well, I think there's a lot of excitement and anticipation about the opening up in East Asia, especially in Southeast Asia. The sector that's most particularly excited about the prospects of opening up, and as it happens at the moment, is the leisure, hospitality, and tourism sectors. These sectors are very much looking forward to the return of Chinese tourists to their retail shops as well as tourist attractions. It is believed that perhaps the primary company that will first benefit from this is probably the airlines company, which has suffered tremendously in the past 3.5 years. And after that, the ripple effects will be felt in the hotel, retail, as well as entertainment industries. And East Asian countries, particularly ASEAN countries, are very much looking forward to the return of Chinese tourism to the region. In the pre-COVID situation, they were already the largest group of tourists. Not only that, they were also the highest spender in the region. So there's a lot of excitement about this, and this ripple effects, as you have mentioned, is probably also going into geopolitical impact because the region has been anticipating the return of China, particularly on the world stage, geopolitically during the G20 ASEAN Summit as well as APEC summits. So probably this is the commercial side of China's return to the world stage in complement with the political aspects.
How much do you see better understanding can be created? Because one of the things people see as challenges during the COVID time past 3 years is lack of face-to-face interactions. Well, it's hard to say how much tourists will be able to bring sophisticated analysis to the country they are traveling to, but how much do you see there is opportunity, Tianwai?
Well, when we think of diplomacy, we tend to think of track one diplomacy. And track one diplomacy is between government officials, between the bureaucrats, between politicians. But we often forget that there is track two diplomacy. And track two diplomacy is based on people-to-people exchanges, tourism, exchanges of young people, exchanges of future leaders of countries. And certainly the opening up of China plays into track two diplomacy. Now, the leaders have met in G20, APEC, as well as ASEAN Summit. It is time for the people to interact with each other, for the Chinese tourists, for the Chinese students, for the Chinese workers, employers, employment pass holders, to be able to interact with their fellow East Asian countries and the rest of the world. And certainly, as you have mentioned, from the advertising that is put out there by East Asian countries, including ASEAN, there is a lot of attempts to attract tourists that will return to the region, anticipated return. Of course, there will be challenges. These challenges will include, for example, the shortage of pilots, the shortage of service staff, and many other immigration issues to be sorted out. But these are all necessary in the normalization of regional tourism in the region, which other East Asian countries have been doing for the past year.
Tian-Wai, just very briefly, I see countries are having different attitudes toward the inbound Chinese tourists. Some of the countries we mentioned, especially in ASEAN economies, there is an opening the arms and embrace the Chinese tourists. In other countries, out of various levels of precautions, there's also going to be a test for Chinese tourists once they enter into those countries, for example, United States and likely Japan as well. So how do you see this very different approaches taken by economies?
Now, for example, countries that require testing would include USA, Italy, Malaysia, Japan, for example. Overall, it is still a positive effect because the people-to-people exchange, people mobility within the region will continue, particularly tourism and students. Many sort of downplay the importance of tourism and students in understanding each other. As you have mentioned earlier on, previously they can only communicate on Zoom and other online platforms. But now they are going to see each other. Old friends are going to reunite. Relationships are going to rekindle. Business people talking to business people, as you know, in the East Asian context, is a high context culture. Having dinners together, having drinks together, having meals together is very important for talking business. So all these will likely to be resumed.
Let me go to you, Rick, about the same question. It is not just about how policy shift will have its impact, but also how people-to-people will likely to be resumed. And at the same time, how the media have been portraying the changes. It will have an impact on those who will not be able to see firsthand or have contact firsthand with those from China. So your thoughts?
I believe that the more that we have people exchanges, the better it is. The better it is for basically the relations between the countries, but also in terms of accuracy. Having me here sharing with my friends what is really happening, not necessarily what they're just seeing by looking at CNN or reading the Wall Street Journal, that makes a difference. The more people you have who have firsthand experience, the more they can share in their own countries. The reality is almost always more nuanced than what you see on television, than what you read in the newspaper. And I also just think that the more people see people from other countries as human beings, as individuals, rather than as representing the government of the other country, the better it is, because we all share in this world much more than what separates us. And so I'm a big believer in this, more than the economics, in terms of just the social progress.
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian-Wai go beyond the headlines.
%5 is likely to be the GDP growth rate, as some analysts suggest, for China for the year 2023. Then, given the latest momentum and also some enthusiasm among investors from different parts of the world, how much do you see that number is possible?
5% is highly likely. Actually, it's very likely that China would grow faster than that. The difficulty for people to grasp now is how we can go from here. Because currently, a lot of people are losing productivity. We see this rising unemployment again. Although the official number still says quite low unemployment rate, and there is the implicit unemployment in the vast rural regions, and it's going to be more acute in the coming year. But it does look like more policies are in place, and we do look forward to a more vibrant housing market next year to bolster the growth, and that's a real possibility now.
About the housing market, we see the PBOC, or shall I say, China's overall financial system has been trying to use some kinds of market ways of trying to deal with some of the debt issues of real estate projects. Do you see that is likely to enjoy some sustained momentum for the year to come, as it is still one of the very important factor having an impact on the Chinese economy and the economic growth rate?
The housing market recovery has become more likely as the policies roll out, because right now banks and different financial institutions are required to extend their loans and other kind of financial services to those real estate developers in stress. The total rescue package for the housing market now is nearly 2 trillion RMB. The money will be spent in the next 2 to 3 years, and that's quite substantial. And most of the money will not be spent to support the commercial housing development. Instead, they will be targeting the rental housing and affordable housing. And based on the city planning that have been rolled out already, it's going to be nearly equivalent as the commercial housing construction in the pre-COVID era. So I do have a relatively high level of confidence now that housing will once again become the pillar of China's recovery in the next year and the few years after that.
The other thing, of course, is the tech sector. As we have seen, there has been emphasized from the Central Economic Work Conference earlier about the importance of the private sector and the private entrepreneurs. And certainly there's also the global issue of tech competition. How much do you see this sector is going to contribute to the recovery of the Chinese economy then?
The digital economy is no doubt going to be the pillar and the driving force for China's economic growth in the next decade. But for 2023, I do have my doubts because this sector is going through this decentralization process. Previously, a few dominating IT giants or basically monopolizing the market, they make the largest contribution to the growth in the internet economy. But they also become this force hindering on technological development and preventing more competition. So now their power has been greatly reduced due to added regulations. To a certain extent, it can be excessive. But now when regulation comes to an end, we are looking forward to see more smaller participants in the market. And that can drive up the employment in the sector and also a more vibrant and more diversified internet economy. So there's more hope in that front, but it cannot be happen within just a few months or a year.
Geopolitics has an impact on that as well. Rick, to you, the U.S. has put out several legislations regarding tech competitions with China. How much will that have an impact, do you see, on people's confidence on the growth of this sector in China? And what would that mean from your perspective about the possible cooperation of supply chains?
Yeah, these are very important points, and I do think that this is something that will be a check on the growth. I mean, Huawei continues to face severe problems in the United States and in Europe, and right now the pressure on Douyin, TikTok, and the parent company to sell the U.S. version, I mean, the TikTok, is going to be growing. You're going to have legislation in Washington and governors taking executive actions in state capitals in the United States. So anyway, I think this leads to uncertainty. I don't think that it will stop the global growth, but I do think that there will be continuing uncertainty. And yes, there could be some supply chain issues. Right now, the pandemic has led to supply chain issues for Apple and other companies. But I think that there's more of an upside there as we come out of the pandemic in China out of lockdowns and out of the next few weeks when people are sick and the rate goes down. I do think the supply chain disruptions will reverse, but I do think the political challenges will remain through 2023.
Dan?
So I do believe more communications between different countries on a civil level could promote growth and understanding. There is, however, a new wave of anti-China sentiment that we can sense in many different countries. So how do we reconcile that this anti-China sentiment can only be transitory rather than a long term? It is certainly up to China's economic prospects, but also it ultimately rests on China's diplomacy. So I have high hope that China's economy will return to normal one way or another in a few years' time. But in terms of diplomacy, China-US relation doesn't have a substantial sign or clear sign that it's going to get better anytime soon. And that poses challenges for a lot of the companies when they make their decision where to move their factories in the next step.
Not just the Chinese economy, but also the international situation, how it's having its impact on China. Tianwai, according to the latest number coming from IMF prediction about the global economic growth for the year 2023 is about 2.7%, if I remember right. And also, of course, 2022 is 3%. 3.2%. Meanwhile, OECD countries, their growth rate is likely to be down to 2.2% compared to 3.1% in the year 2022. So there seems to be slowing down and also a danger of a recession for some of the developed economies, but also in the developing economies, emerging ones, the threat of inflation and others are also a big problem. How do you see this combined layers of challenges? What does that mean for the Chinese economy?
One good sign is that during the 3.5 years of COVID infections and pandemic, the East Asian countries did not back away from free trade. They did not back away from regionalism. In fact, they signed the RCEP during that period. And these are good signs that East Asian countries intend to continue with free trade and regionalism. Recently, there has been a lot of talk about CPTPP as well. Even China has expressed support to join CPTPP. So if the momentum continues, where the focus is on economic regionalism and free trade rather than geopolitical tensions, and if the leaders are able to find a way in which they can coexist and live with each other, then economics has a chance to take off because economics in East Asia or Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific has always been built on the foundation of political stability. And one good sign, I think, was visible during the G20 ASEAN Plus 3 as well as APEC Summit. You could see that there was a lot of positive photo taking by top leaders between China and other countries and between the other countries themselves. So there appears to be a good opening. The challenge is to keep the momentum going on the desire for peace, the desire for stability, and a focus on tackling an anticipated recession, as well as the fallout, the economic fallout from the pandemic.
Rick, your thoughts?
Well, I think that we've missed what I would call the bear in the room, which is the Russia-Ukraine. And I think one of the best things that could happen for the Chinese economy, as counterintuitive as it sounds, is the Russians withdraw from Ukraine and that war ends. Because I think that the damage that it's done to China's image in Europe is significant. That's one thing that I would look for. If there's any way to bring peace to Ukraine, I think that it could be good not only for the entire global economy, but for China's image in Europe and the economic prospects in that part of the world.
Then about the crisis going on between Russia and Ukraine.
When we look at where this is going, it just seems that the US really take their support to Ukraine as a political win, and they successfully unite their allies along this line. And that can be a long-term negative influence on China. Because when it comes to China's investment, just from economic perspective in Europe or in the US, in the future, it's going to be a lot harder for any of the US allies to stand up to the US stance when it comes to restriction of China's tech giants. If any of the European countries want to do business with China, they have to prove a lot of things. Certainly, they cannot do business with Huawei as much as they want, even if they offer the best products. So the world is more divided when we think about what's going on with Ukraine. And China is caught in between Russia and the US. And certainly, I totally agree with Rick. China doesn't want to be associated with this kind of reputation, supporting this level of crisis, especially not behind Russia. But ultimately, I do believe economic solution can be a much better and easier way to unite people. Diplomacy is very important, but it will take much longer time and is subject to domestic political pressures.
Before we go, I'd love to have every one of you very briefly your thoughts on the future of the Chinese economy and what might be the most important factor having an impact on it for the year 2023. Dan, please.
China's economy will face great challenges in 2023. It requires a lot of wisdom from top leadership in implementing the right policies. Also, the opening up stance is very important to assure overseas investors, and we're looking forward to more clear policy signals.
Rick.
I will agree with all of that. I do believe the opening up is significant. I think that consumer confidence in China is very important, and I do think that an easing of the situation in Ukraine will be important too for global growth and Chinese growth.
Tian, why?
Reopening is a positive sign. Managing and mitigating the challenges will be there, and countries need to work together as well as contain the dangerous geopolitical tensions from breaking out. And right now, economy and diplomacy are very important to resolve that. Once that is resolved, we can keep the communication sustainable.
Thank you so much for the three of you for joining us. Really appreciate it.